Welcome to the TTT News Special. I'm DK Rossa. Thank you so much for joining us. We are involving ourselves in some risky business for this news special. And now we were initially carded to focus heavily on the risk of vaccine hesitancy with our guest, but now we get to widen our gaze and speak to risk management in general with a risk management consultant, lecturer, founder at the Caribbean Risk Management Academy and the Trinidad and Tobago Risk Management Institute, or TTRMI, lead consultant at KHBC Limited, Ken Hackshaw. Thank you so much for joining us, Ken. How you do?
I'm doing fine, DK. Thanks for having me. It's about time we were able to connect, eh?
I know they say delayed gratification is a thing, but oh gosh, man. but I'm saying from jump though, this convo, it will exceed our allotted 20 minutes for TV, but you can get the entire session by tuning into our digital platforms as Facebook and YouTube at TTT Live Online. You don't want to miss a moment. Now, Ken, I like follow-up questions, but there's so much to cover, and we're building this castle in the sky from the ground up. So, first things first, please, let's start off by defining risk from your perception.
Okay, so you know what's funny though? You could ask 10 people in a room what is risk to them, and they'll each probably tell you something different. You know, risk is a hazard, it's a bad thing, it's a disaster. But and there is about, I don't know, about 35 definitions if you Google it, different definitions. But contextually, I tend to focus on the ISO definition of risk, which is the effect of uncertainty on achieving an objective, be it a personal objective, a business objective, an organizational objective. So what can go wrong or what needs to go right for you to achieve whatever objective you're willing to achieve? And so in that box is what will be a suitable definition of risk.
And what are some of those factors that affect risk? And even while asking that, I want to ask, where does risk management begin? Is it we start with a company? Is it we start with a body? Is it something that we start personally? Where do we look at these factors?
Yeah. Risk management, in my respectful opinion, starts with you, the individual. And you know what's kind of weird though? We tend to manage risk better as individuals than when we are in an organization. And I could give you a plethora of examples of that, but it actually begins with the individual, because there are things like risk tolerance, risk appetite, risk perception that each individual brings to bear, personally and professionally. The beautiful thing is, at the organizational level, what works well is when everybody is singing from the same hymn book. Because left up to each individual, it's literally like orchestrated chaos. So when we talk about risk management framework, it speaks to what exists at the organizational or institutional level to help identify and manage the risk to the organization. But it does start with the individual. You, DK, me, Ken, and everybody else in that room that you're in there now.
And I like the fact that you raised the issue of risk meaning or potentially meaning different things to different people, because that brings me to the question of framing and communicating risk. And especially as you would have started that explanation within an organization or within a body. But how do we frame and communicate risk? Because I can see the way that some people would have a sentence, what's that in the road ahead? What's that in the road ahead? So using the same thing, but they're at different levels of meaning that can be taken away.
You sound as though you have attended one of my workshops, DK, and I can't remember you ever attending it. But let me expand on that example. So when it comes to, and then maybe later on we'll talk about what is the outrage risk factors. Yeah, and so there's an accident, and there are 5 people involved in the accident, and 3 people die. So I come to you, DK, and I say the following: hey, DK, you know there was an accident involving 5 people, and 2 died? I go to another colleague and I share the same information. I said, hey, John, you know there was an accident with 5 people and 3 survived? Yeah, same data points, communicated differently, framed differently, different emotions around the delivery of the information. That speaks to how that audience will perceive the information, will perceive the risk. Yeah, so framing is critical. Data is critical, obviously, but the sharing, the information, the communication of that data is also very critical.
Now, you say that, and I feel like if I was in the hog pen, I would have been the pig that's squealing. And in terms of the way that individuals, media houses, persons share information.
Yeah.
And it's the same information, but what we choose to highlight and focus. And it can give such a different meaning to the people who are looking towards people with the information, what they take away from it.
Yeah, yeah. And the knowledge of this can be used positively or negatively. So when you talk about the social amplification of risk, and social amplification of risk is using social media, print and print media, or folks like yourself to communicate or share information. So if the emphasis is on the negatives around vaccination, folks will have a certain perception around that that theme or that topic. If the information is more positive, or if more positive information is presented, then the implication is obviously a bit different. So if someone, and I guess it, well, not guess, it does happen. If, I know we'll get into another element of risk, which speaks to the psychology of risk, but if one amplifies negatives, hazards, bad things, then the perception of the population will be as such, hey, maybe this thing is real. It's happening here in the US. I would imagine it's happening in Trinidad and Tobago and other states and other islands as well. But yeah, risk communication is very, very critical, very critical.
And even before we go down the road of, I guess, a little more social amplification, asking for some of those examples, an easy example, I guess, would be politics or moving on either side of the political divide. Because it's funny sometimes, in a sad sort of way, how what can seem as though is the best thing can also look as though it's the worst thing. So what are some of those other, I guess, day-to-day examples that you would see, the way that we frame, the way that we communicate risk, being done in a positive way or being done in a negative way? And once again, I'll try to pull it back or ask you to pull it back to an organizational structure.
Okay, so data is critical, or call it information. And by the way, information is one of the most needed commodity right now. So if your information is not spot on, that could influence one's perception. Meaning, if you're spreading lies or mistruths, that will influence one's perception. If you're spreading truths, good information, that obviously influences one's perception of risk. Or if we go back to the pandemic, what is being communicated, how it's being communicated, and sharing enough data does influence the outcomes, and even in the political space, right? And I know I tend to try and stay away from the politics of any conversation, but there is something called political risk, which is a major contributor to how an organization, be it internal politics, organizational politics, or politics as it refers to government. But another good aspect, which I didn't mention about the definition of risk, is the ultimate goal of effective risk management, DK, is so that good decisions are made, so better decisions are made, right? A good analogy is, if you're going home one day and you hear strange noises in your house, or you heard that a bandit is in your house, you probably wouldn't go, or you would probably call the police or take some other action. In the absence of that information, in the absence of that data, you could get in trouble. Yes? Very, very simple. I should write that down. I didn't think about that analogy before. But that's as good as it gets. Data and information. And respectfully, there are too many institutions that are making decisions in the absence of data, in the absence of information. And one tends to rely, a lot of decision makers tend to rely on their experience in the job, right? Be it 30 years or 40 years or 25, but an experience in and of itself can be a risk.
And with that in mind, I want to take a break. We come back, and I want to follow like a dog with a bone how it is we make decisions from a data-driven perspective. When we return, we are speaking with a risk management consultant, Ken Hackshaw. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are speaking about risk management with Ken Hackshaw, risk management consultant, as well as so many other things. But Ken, just before we took the break, we were talking about moving from a position of information, of having data, towards making informed decisions. We can even start to throw in words like praxis. But so reflecting, acting, and then looking at what was done, what was the result, and using that to inform further decisions. But it seems as though so many people are using the word pivot. Pivot is a word that is in vogue. And sometimes I wonder whether or not we're pivoting doing the right things. Because so many people, you can see someone else doing it and say, I wonder if it's working for them. It seems to be working for them. Let me use it. But we may have very different situations. So what is the important? I want you to go back again in terms of using that data to make informed decisions to mitigate or manage risk. Thank you.
Yeah, and great question. So there are a couple of things that go in there. So you use the word practice. There's a maxim that goes, practice makes perfect, but it doesn't make new. So what you don't want to do and so using this word pivot, if you are going to change directions, pivoting, you want to move into something that's a direction that's more productive, more resilient, more sustainable, and thereby probably increase your profits. Yeah, but in the absence of good information, data, good data, measurements, metrics, then I think your moving forward can be impacted. And so it matters not if you are a doubles vendor, a coconut vendor, or major conglomerate. Information and data is critical. And where that data comes from is also important. Who delivers, who captures the information is also important, because there's a number of things in the press in Trinidad and Tobago where certain folks have been sharing bad information to decision makers that could impact the outcome of something. So you know what, DK, risk management is much more now today and going forward than a process. It's much more than a methodology. It's much more than a framework. Yeah. So we talk about the psychology of risk. We talk about risk culture. And risk culture is the attitudes and behavior of folks in the employ of an organization, or parliamentarians, or leaders or newscasters, right? What your attitudes and behavior drives the culture of the organization. And if you have good behavior, good attitude, that the culture of the organization is a bit better than that which you have bad attitudes, bad behavior, bad work ethic. Yeah. So going back to the word data, we talk about data-driven decision making or risk-based decision making. What it amounts to is having accurate, timely data that can be used to effect good decision making. That's the bottom line. And one other little analogy, and I'm full of those. What gets measured gets managed. There are too many institutions that don't have metrics, don't have service level agreements, or anything that which is part of the data gathering, data capture of any institution. Things that gets measured gets managed. And there's the whole accountability factor with that as well. But don't get me started. I love to evangelize about these things, though. So you get me started,
But I like the fact, and let me take that saying and develop it a little bit. What gets measured gets managed. But one of the reasons that I asked that question is that it seems as though people, we do what we need to during this time. So that pivot doesn't necessarily feel as though it's 100% there. We're forced to. And then when you get back to a position where you're able to default to some level that you were able to, you don't use anything that you've learned. You just try to go back to that default. So how does that impact the entire risk management? Because it's one thing, there are many people who are averse to risk. But at the same time, being averse to risk doesn't mean that you're not going to embrace it on some level. I think the bigger problem is when you're averse to risk, and two, you're averse to change. So you try to keep on doing the same thing and expect different results, which is one definition of insanity. Yeah.
So again, you're touching on critical words in the risk management space. So when we talk about pivot, or we talk about data, or you mentioned going in the right direction. In this environment, an environment called 2021 and beyond, resilience or organizational resilience must form part of the strategic imperative of any institution. Because all organizations, up to and including TTT, will face threats from another pandemic, from cybercrime, severe weather, climate change, civil or political instabilities. Look what's happening now in Cuba. There's some issues in South Africa. There's this issue in Haiti. And they aren't, well, with the exception of South Africa, they aren't that far from the shores of Trinidad and Tobago that there can be impact to the Trinidad and Tobago population and island. So to my earlier point, you just don't think about the processes or the things that can go wrong or need to go right. You have to factor in, especially when you're speaking about resilience or organizational resilience, you have to consider all of those, I don't even want to refer to it as esoteric, but some things that you don't necessarily have control over: climate risk, severe weather, some civil or political instabilities. Some of those things you may have not necessarily control over, but you can reduce the impact once those things eventuate. But there's a lot more that needs to go in, DK, into the modern day thinking around effective risk management. And so a couple of days ago, I was working on a project, and lo and behold, anthropology is now a consideration in effective risk management, because it speaks to anthropology, not as we know it as bones from the dinosaur area, but it speaks to human life, human existence, human. And the greatest risk to any institution are the humans, people risk. So when you talk about human capital risk, anthropology plays a role in how humans develop and will continue to develop. So I know it's a kind of like far-reaching, but that's how deep it needs to go now.
I don't think it's far-reaching at all. And one of the things in this last 1.5 minutes we have for this broadcast is you just spoke about modern-day risk management, but some of the things that you're saying carry me back to a book like the Book of Five Rings, which is a book that was written by a samurai, where he said that a samurai every day should focus on the ways that he could die, that an enemy could kill him. So that if this happens, he's already gone through these things in his mind, so he's not paralyzed, he isn't suffering from paralysis by analysis, and he's able to better function.
And prepare. So we are, by, as Trinbagonians, we tend to be a bit more reactive than we ought to be, or we should be in this modern day risk environment. So we need to be more proactive. We need more pre-mortems than post-mortems. We need to focus. So when something goes right, we need to do a deep dive into that as much as we do a deep dive into what goes wrong, right? And so those are the psychology part of risk management, decision making, and what goes into the individuals that are making these decisions. And there's in a plethora of case studies with failures across the Caribbean, including Trinidad and Tobago.
But even before you get into those case studies, though, this is a perfect time to end this portion of it. If you want a little more, because you're going to get some more, log into TTT Live online, either Facebook or YouTube. If not, thank you so much for joining the TTT News Special for this edition. And if you're viewing now, we say congratulations. You are in the know, or you're going to be in the know. We're speaking with Ken Hackshaw, risk management consultant. And Ken, one of the things that we were speaking about was preparing and making sure that you learn from what goes right in addition to what goes wrong. I mean, some people say L is no longer a loss, is a lesson, but you can also learn from your wins and what you need to capitalize on, possibly even better going forward. One of the things I want to ask, though, what is the importance of timing in mitigating risk?
Well, actually, it is. So when timing is critical, because one of the components of determining the potential impact of a risk is likelihood and frequency, or probability, more scientific word, and that has to do with timing, right? And more than that, timing in terms of, so we talk about future-proofing an organization, yeah? So we talked about a lot of the things in having resilience or building resilience in an organization. We talked about, threats, both internal and external. I need to share this with you. So risk management is not a panacea. Bad things will still happen. Losses will still occur. But risk management is like an airbag in a vehicle. I love to use this analogy. An airbag in a vehicle doesn't prevent an accident from occurring, but it will reduce the impact when those accidents occur. You reduce the impact to the individuals, right? When a bad thing occurs. So the deploy, if I stay with your question of timing, when you're building in, when these manufacturers are building in airbags, it must be timed so that there is no major impact to the individual. So your airbag cannot deploy 10 minutes after an accident occurs, right? This is another one I think I need to write down as well. But when an organization decides, okay, we need to put this control in to to mitigate this risk or to reduce the impact. When that control goes in, i.e. when you hire a new person, when you change a process, when you fire a person, it must be done timely. It must be done timely. So timing is a critical component to both the treating with risk management and or reacting to prevent further occurrence. So timing is critical. I hope you can relate to my analogy with the airbag.
I do. A little nervous some ways whether or not my CEO will look at this and say, okay, well, I need to time some things now. But and that also brings me to the question of issues leading to companies not addressing risk or not addressing risk in a timely enough fashion. What are some of those things or reasons you think a company might say, okay, well, let's try to ride it out and hope for the best, as opposed to address that risk head on? Yeah.
So, I'll try not to get into much trouble, but oftentimes, you know what? There is a company now that I'm having conversations with. I must give them kudos because they do not now have a formal risk management framework, but they are now moving in that direction. So kudos to them. So earlier when I said experience in of itself is a risk. So there are many organizations, private and public, that believe since nothing bad has ever happened to them, that we could, to use your words, we could ride this through. We can continue as is. Yeah. The environment as we knew it 2019, 2018 and beyond is not the environment that we're going to be living and working in now and going forward. There's too much complexity. There's too much vulnerabilities. There are too many uncertainties that is ahead of us, that if we don't prepare ourselves and our organization, and this is not about any doomsday conversation, it's just about being pre-actors as opposed to reactors. Yeah. So many leaders from parliament to mom and pop to major institutions you know, if they weren't ever exposed to formal risk management, they may be a little less inclined to say, let's go that way, or let's spend a few dollars to put that in. And again, they have been doing the same thing well for so long that there's this belief that we can continue, and they very well may. And that doesn't mean to say, DK, that these institutions, these individuals, these governments, entities aren't managing risk to some extent. You know, it may not be formalized, it may not be structured, but there is an element of risk management in there. But it needs to get so much better. Otherwise, you'll continue to see failures, both financial, operational, reputation-wise. If you can't think it, you can't act on it. And that's what training and education comes into. And that's why I formed both the Trinidad Tobago Risk Management Institution and the Caribbean Risk Management Academy. It's prime, you know, as Captain Cook once said, can't remember what he said, but its prime objective is to train, inculcate, push, drive the education and relevance of risk management.
And with that in mind, let's actually talk about the Caribbean Risk Management Academy, because I, for one, think that it is very important that while we are able to speak to a macro level, global scale, global situations, we're also able to create knowledge and look at ways that we're building capacity in-house, at home, on a local level. Because to some levels, there are nuances that we would understand, that someone from outside would not be able to understand. There are things that just, like a kuyamout, or a look, or a stoops, and being able to create that knowledge to apply to specific situations, I think is important. So what, from your take, and we're also saying the CaribbeanRiskManagement.com is the website that people can visit, persons can visit to get a little more information from the website itself. But what is the purpose, in your thoughts, of the academy?
So by way of, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag. So we are working with, well, to answer the question, the main focus is to inform, educate, train both leaders, students, all asunder in what constitute risk management. It is to increase the risk IQ of our decision makers and our employees in Trinidad and Tobago through the Caribbean. It's to have a more risk educated population, to increase the risk intelligence. Yeah, and we do that by workshops, by programs at universities, and actually we are working on a collaboration with the University of the West Indies at Kayville, on a major collaboration with one of their departments, and more to come on that later. But you know what? It's not a toot our own horn here, but you know, it's a difficult proposition, yeah, to sell, literally to sell this, because it is a sale, to get folks interested in knowing, into formally and structurally developing a risk framework that can assist them both personally and professionally. But CRMA its prime objective is to increase the risk intelligence of our Caribbean institutions and brothers and sisters.
And I like the fact that you talk about risk intelligence, because one of the things you said that the mom and pop store may not know or may not have an idea of what some of these things are, but who is the type of person, should I say ideal candidate? Because not everybody would want to go to UWI, not everybody will go on to go to Arthur Lockjack, but at the same time, capacity building is important. So how do you address those different levels, those different tiers?
So another great question. So a part of our strategic goals is to introduce fundamentals of risk management in young adults, and so we have been speaking to certain schools for us to come and do pro bono workshops for students at the high school or the secondary school level in Trinidad and Tobago, Form 4, Form 5, or Form 6, and so we can change so we can improve the risk intelligence of folks coming into leadership, maybe change the trajectory of how they think, not just critically, but there are concepts called lateral thinking. And in the cybersecurity space, there's something called adversarial thinking. And we need to be more like that. Again, experience in of itself can be a risk. Yeah, and these are not just maxims or something that's an analogy of any sort. These things are real. So it's getting to the future decision makers. That's how we are going to do it, and offer classes online. Soon you'll be able to log into careerandriskmanagement.com and sign on to do programs. So you need not have to go to a university or one of our associates, be it Lockjack or whomever we work with going forward.
All right, let me chuck some fire and push back a little bit. I remember my dad telling me once, some people have 25 years of experience.
Yeah.
Some people have 1 year of experience multiplied 25 times.
Yeah.
Because they didn't improve from the situation. So the lesson is being taught again and again and again because the air is a little hard now.
Yeah.
But with that in mind, I think final question to close off this conversation, and we want to thank you so much. But coming out of the pandemic, what is one thing generally that you'd like persons to have a little more in their tool bag or to think about with regard to risk, with regard to risk management, with regard to risk intelligence?
Yeah, prepare for the next pandemic. And that's not there are more to come. And you know what? So when we talk about risk intelligence, you don't have to go necessarily get a professional certificate or a degree in the topics, which and you know what, DK, interestingly, at the individual level, you practice risk management much better at your home than you do on the job. And maybe next time we speak up, we'll get into that. So it's to take that same thinking, that same responsibility, that same accountability with you when you go to your job and have that as a shared experience. But it's all about being proactive and anticipatory. Proactive and anticipatory, and understand that not because you have passed the same way 20 times doesn't mean if you pass that way the 21st time, something can go wrong. That's basically it.
What a meteor pass you. So, all right, we want to thank you so much, Mr. Hackshaw, Ken Hackshaw, for bringing it home in a way that we can think about with analogies, with examples. And we want to thank you on behalf of the news team for tuning in to the TTT News Special. I'm DK Ronsta. Have a good one.